One of our favorite guests has returned for an encore presentation. Weird? We've got Logan Metesh back, and what's he talking about this time?
Last time we talked to Logan on the show, we were talking about the amazing career of John Pedersen. I invited Logan back to talk about another firearms designer who made some great guns that we have all heard about. But we've heard about his guns, but not his name, which, well, we'll just talk about that in the interview. Okay, joining the show once again is firearms historian and proprietor at High Caliber History, Logan Metesh. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing great. How are you?
And I wanted to have you on. Last time we talked about John Pedersen, who is a guy that has a prolific firearms designing career, but is not someone that's on the tip of the tongue of people as, say, Eugene Stoner or John Browning. This person who actually had Pedersen had very close ties with John Browning. This guy also had very close ties to John Browning, but you don't hear about him very much. As a matter of fact, you hear about him so infrequently, I have no idea how to pronounce his name.
Yeah, you're in good company there because I don't know exactly how to pronounce his name either. I've heard it a few different ways. Probably the more correct way would be Dieudonné Saive, but I've also heard it, I guess you can call it Americanized, of just Dieudonné Saive. But in an effort to avoid butchering his name repeatedly for the duration of the segment here, I think we're just going to refer to him as DS or Mr. DS, because really, quite frankly, we're going to have a lot of acronyms in this talk, including FAL and NATO and FN and M2 and GP and ACP. I mean, there's going to be a lot of acronyms, so I think he'll be right at home with just DS.
Yeah. So who was this Belgian man?
So this man, Mr. DS, he comes to us May 23rd, 1888, and he is a prolific arms designer. As you and I have talked, we've said that John Pedersen was kind of John Browning 2.0, and Mr. DS is kind of John Browning 2.0.1, if you will, because they were very well linked together in a lot of the stuff they did. But he was also a prolific arms designer on his own. And of course, what most people know him for is the FAL, or the Fusil Automatique de Guerre, which again, we'll just call it the FAL because I'll continue to butcher it, which has become known as the right arm of the free world, and rightly so, because that gun has been used everywhere and is used everywhere, and that is his main claim to fame. But he did a lot of other work. He spent the majority of his career at FN. He joined them shortly after high school and worked there all the way through retirement in, I believe, 1954. So he had a very long career with FN. But that's not to say that he didn't do work elsewhere. During World War I, when Belgium was invaded, he went to the UK and did some work for the Vickers Company. In 1928, he went to Yugoslavia and helped set up the state arsenal in a town that starts with a K that I won't even begin to try to pronounce. And he also spent some time in the UK again, this time during World War II, working with Enfield. And so he's got a lot of irons in the fire throughout his career, despite the fact that the majority of it was spent at FN.
So what are some of the designs that do you have some earlier work that he did before his major breakthroughs came through?
The easiest thing is, like we said, he went to FN shortly after high school. And then, of course, I mentioned with the World War I era, he was in the UK working for Vickers. But then when he comes back to FN in the early 1920s, that's where things really start to pick up for him. And his association with Browning really takes off. In 1921, France approaches FN to design a semi-auto pistol with a 15-round capacity. And at this time, John Browning is FN's chief designer, and he is uninterested in working on something like that. He is totally happy with his single stack magazines. The Colt 1911 is charging head on and doing very well by 1921. And by God, that gun's good enough with a single stack. Your gun in France should be good enough with a single stack. So he's really not interested. But it's Mr. DS who decides, well, I think I'd like to take on that double stack challenge, which sounds like it should be from a fast food commercial. But he decides to base his initial magazine design off of the FN Model 1903, which is not the same as the Colt 1903, which is also another Browning design. This one's in 9x20 millimeter, and it's with that magazine that Browning finally, he sees the light bulb and he realizes that, okay, maybe it's time we should start working with the French to design this new pistol. So they come up with a couple different options, one of which is a lock breech option designed using this new magazine. But this is where Mr. DS really takes it over for Browning because the patent isn't issued on this particular design until February of 1927, which is a few months after Browning passed away. So he is really kind of off and running with this design. The result of this gun is the 13-round, again, Americanizing the pronunciation, the Grand Redempment. It's a 13-round pistol. It uses some of the patent designs that Browning had created for the 1911. Of course, being the legal-minded man he was, he waited until Colt's patents had expired on there to not get into any trouble. And he further refines that pistol. And then he kind of steps away. There's some things going on in the interim years. In 1928, he goes to Yugoslavia and he sets up a state arsenal there. In 1929, he comes back to Belgium and he oversees the manufacture of a commercial version of yet another John Browning design, the BAR, the Browning Automatic Rifle. By 1930, he ends up occupying what was Browning's position there. He's now their chief weapons designer, trying to fill some really big shoes. Again, continuing to improve on more of Browning's designs, including the M1919 M2 in 1932, increasing the rate of fire on that gun. And by 1938, he has tinkered with it even more, and he's managed to get the rate of fire up to 1,500 rounds per minute. Going back to 1931, what we know as the FN Baby Browning, despite having Browning's name in it, it's not Browning's gun. Browning has passed by this time, and so the FN Baby Browning is actually a design by Mr. DS. Very popular 25 ACP caliber gun, more than 500,000 of them made, primarily between 1931 and 1979. They go on to be made by a few other countries, or a few other companies as well, like MAB between 79 and 83. And I think there's even one U.S. company still making them today. So there's a lot going on in his world. He is an incredibly busy designer, working on a variety of different things. But like all good inventors, certain stuff, the cream rises to the top. And so by 1934, the French term grande puissance, meaning high power, was first applied to the design for what becomes the French GP35 self-loading pistol, that then goes on to be known as the FM Browning High Power. And of course, the iconic place in history that gun has is that it's the first 9x19 millimeter handgun using a true staggered column double stack magazine.
Now, one thing to stop you real quick on it, just because my handgun radio geek is diving in, and one of the things that I'm very, very fascinated on is things that lead up to what are pretty much the modern standards. And of course, you pick up a Glock or you pick up any of these like brand new striker fired pistols, because everyone's making one now. Almost all of them have what is called the Browning linkless system. Was that
right.
Was that an actual Browning invention, or is that another one that DS just allowed Browning to take the credit for?
That's a great question, and I don't have an answer to that. I'm not sure, but that is a great question. Perhaps someone listening to this will know the answer and chime in comments somewhere and let us know. So the high power design is now in full swing. It's what we know today as the high power. It has been refined to that design, and so you would think that now that's essentially what the French said they wanted to some extent back in 1921. Now that the design is really raring to go and in its final production form, they would adopt the gun, right?
That seems natural. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it seems natural and logical, we're going to do the opposite. So instead, they adopt what becomes known as the M1935, and that is chambered in 7.65 long, which is a derivative. And here's another tie-in to our previous conversation. It's a derivative of the cartridge that the Pedersen device fired during World War I era.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. So it's all linked together. And this M1935 is an interesting design because the Swiss actually really like the design, and they end up licensing it, and it becomes the basis of their P210 pistol. So moving on from there, FN markets this new gun as the Browning High Power, probably because the Dieudonné Saive High Power is just too much to fit on a slide. But so they offer it to the world, and in 1940, by that point, they've sold more than 56,000 of them, most of which go to the Belgian military. Of course, also by 1940, Germany has started their invasion route for the past year, moving through Europe. And in May of 1940, they occupy Belgium, and they have taken over FN's production plant there in Liège. And so they are making a version of the high power at the FN plant there under their designation, the Pistol 640B. But okay, now we've got Belgium occupied by Germany. We know that Mr. DS doesn't like to be in Belgium when his country has been invaded, given the fact that he went to the UK to work for Vickers during World War I. So where is he during World War II? He's back in the UK, but this time he's working for Enfield. And by 1944, they are busy making copies of his P35 designated pistol, and they call it the number 2 Mark I. Other high powers that are being made in Toronto and Canada, because again, that's still a British-held place, they are making them by John Inglis and Company, and they've got 2 different variants that they make there. There's one with fixed sights that you see on high-power designs all over the place, and then you see a design that is really, really sought after by collectors because it's got a tangent sight. And that pistol is also cut for a detachable shoulder stock. And those guns are the cream of the crop in the collector world. When you get guys that really love high powers, they are really looking for those tangent sights. Now, a lot of those guns were sent to China, but the guns that didn't go to China ended up with the Canadian Army, and it was designated the number 1 Mark I. After World War II, the high-power design continues to march on, and it is, without a shadow of a doubt, the most iconic 1911-esque design pistols out there. And it's really, really something that Mr. DS doesn't get the credit that he deserves for it, because even though it bears Browning's name, it's not Browning's gun. I mean, sure, he laid the groundwork for the design, but if the guy's dead for the entire production of the gun, it's not really his. And Mr. DS he gets slighted on that. I mean, it became the standard issue pistol for more than 90 countries throughout the world. I mean, that is a hell of an accomplishment. And, as we said at the beginning, he's so unknown, we don't even really know how to pronounce his name. And that's an absolute shame.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely true. We haven't even gotten into the rifles that we mentioned earlier, but I think we're running a little long on time, so I'll have to have you back next week.
All righty. Well, thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to being back.
Yeah, again, that's Logan Metesh from High Caliber History.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. If you enjoy the channel and the content here and you think you've got even $1 worth of knowledge out of it, head on over to the Patreon page and become a patron there. We've got a bunch of different levels and some awesome swag that you can get as well. There's a link to it in the description. Thanks and have a great day.